Gilgal. This is where they first camped when they came across the Jordan. No one had really investigated here because most of the archaeologists had no confidence that this was a true story anyway, and they hadn't looked. And so he went to look. In Joshua chapter 4, the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month, camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Well, that's pretty specific. Now, here's where it is. Those 12 stones which had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. Well, he found the spot and found more than he anticipated finding. Just was amazed. Here is the diagram that he has from his research. It's in the shape of a shoe. Now, at the heel, you find a configuration that fits precisely the dimensions of the tabernacle, which is what they set up here when they came across. Out on the toe, you find a circular area there that we'll look at again in a moment. But what is this about? And as he thought about it, he reflected back on Deuteronomy chapter 11, where Moses told them, every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your border will be from the wilderness to Lebanon, from the river to the Euphrates as far as the western sea. And then Joshua said in chapter 1, every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I've spoken to Moses. The people got there and they set up this area to make the claim, this is ours. And they set up this double pathway of stones, the pathway in between the two rows of stones, in the shape of a foot. And evidently they marched around, perhaps with the Ark of the Covenant, saying, basically, this is ours. And that heel portion that you can see again is exactly the dimensions of the tabernacle. And that circular area down near the toe has just been, that hasn't been published yet. You won't be able to read this possibly until next year. But in the middle of that circular altar appearing is 12 standing stones. I think that's awesome. I know where those stones came from, I believe. But here is a picture of that double pathway that surrounds and defines this foot, where they were making, I believe, the claim. This country is ours. As you look at this off in the distance, you see Jericho. It's on the eastern edge, just exactly where the Bible indicated it should be. As we go to Jericho, of course, a very famous area and where a great deal of archaeological work has been done, we recall Joshua chapter 6, verse 3, you'll march around the city, all the men of war. You'll do so for 6 days. The priests carry the ram's horns. They blow the ram's horns, the trumpets, the walls fall down on the seventh day so that the people will go up straight ahead. Pretty amazing story. Not exactly a reasonable sounding battle plan. Just march them to death, go around and around, and it falls down. Well, this is not a normal plan. This is a supernatural plan. And a lot of archaeologists have been here. The original archaeologist, Garstang, did work in the early 1900s, was confident this was Joshua's Jericho. But then that was refuted, we're told. There is a cable car that allows you to go up over the tell, which you see here in the circle. This is the mound where the ancient city is found, and quite a bit of excavation can be seen from the air. Not too many people riding the cable car nowadays. This is the Hamas headquarters. They haven't quite got the knack of promoting tourism there, shooting everybody. But after Garstang had done his work, Kathleen Kenyon took over. She's one of the ones who we're told has modernized archaeology in Israel. And she says the city belonged to a much earlier time and could not be biblical Jericho based on the absence of the imported Cypriot ware pottery. This is special pottery from Cyprus. That should be there if this is Joshua's time. And there's some fairly reasonable conclusions regarding that. She dug and she didn't find it. And so she concluded it couldn't be Joshua's Jericho. She did acknowledge that things were burnt and the walls had fallen. The lack of pottery proved that it could not be Joshua's Jericho. And then she died, fortunately. We'll have more to say about her later. Bryant Wood began to work there in the late 90s and after the turn of the century, and found exactly what she said would indicate that it was Joshua's Jericho, but she says it wasn't there. He found that it was. This is expensive pottery. She was digging in the poor part of the city. He said you ought to look in the prosperous part, and he found lots of it. And we, by the way, do have an excellent example of that Cypriot pottery back in the museum, the artifact room, that you can examine. But not only did he find the pottery that she said would indicate Joshua's Jericho, he found a continuous series of Egyptian scarabs with dated inscriptions. I mean, how do you nail it down any better? An unbroken series extended from the 18th century BC, way before the Exodus, up to the time of the conquest where it stops. An unbroken series right up to the time of the conquest, and it's over. There's no way to establish it any better than that. He found a number of things, some of which Kenyon had found, the remains of a fortified tower, storage containers that had indicated were full of grain at the time that it was burned. Normally, you wouldn't find that with a conquered city because grain is a commodity much like our money today. And so the people that conquer it take the grain. But they didn't here. Well, we know they were commanded not to take things from Jericho. And furthermore, in Joshua chapter 3, we're told that when they came across the Jordan, this was at the time of the harvest. And so the storage containers would be full, and they would leave them full, and then the burned city is piled on top of it. Again, confirming what we find. He found the retrievement wall at the base of the tell that had reinforced it. He found the fallen brick outside that retrievement wall that formed basically a ramp going up toward the city. Here are some of those fallen brick where we were just a few months ago. This is the diagram that Bryant Wood made showing the fallen brick making virtually a ramp going up the retaining wall toward the tell, and this is the way they conquered the city. One of the most amazing things that he found, just made chills go up and down my spine as I looked at it. There was one portion of the wall that was still remaining. The whole wall didn't fall. There was one. You remember there was a promise that was made to one whose house was on the wall that it would be preserved. And we look at that one portion that is left, and we see the house. I think I know who lived there. Joshua chapter 2, she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. And she was promised that her house would be preserved. The only portion that's left. Well, I find that thrilling.